Hello everyone, bonjour tout le monde. Je m'appelle Tracy Donaldson. I'm Tracy Donaldson from Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, and welcome to this session, which will provide an overview and examples from IRCC's anti-racism activities. I'm going to ask my co-presenters if they wouldn't mind just letting everybody know their names and the organization they're with, starting with Ezgi, followed by Jess and David, please.
Hello, bonjour. My name is Ezgi Sarıoğlu, and I'm the program manager for Red Deer Local Immigration Partnership.
Hello, bonjour. My name is Jesslyn Thibodeau. I'm an assistant director in settlement and integration policy for IRCC.
Hi, I'm Dave Hickey. I'm an advisor to the Deputy Minister. I got a special interest in community engagement and in the department's anti-racism activities at IRCC.
Thanks very much, everyone. Premièrement, je tiens à souligner que les terres sur lesquelles je me trouve font partie du territoire traditionnel non cédé du peuple Anishinaabe. So while the session will be delivered in English, I did want to take a second to take a moment to do the land acknowledgement in French, and to encourage presenters and participants in the chat to please feel free to use the official language of your choice. And the land acknowledgement that I just gave recognized that I'm on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And of course, you're visiting us from many different parts of the country. We encourage you to take a moment to do a little bit of recognition of the land where you find yourself. So this webinar, we want to let you know, number one, that it is a webinar, which means that we do not, unfortunately, have benefit of being able to see all of your lovely faces, and we are not able to unmute you or to be able to have an actual back and forth dialogue. So for that reason, we're going to encourage you very strongly to please make use of the chat if you wish to give comments. Please make extensive use of the Q&A. You'll see that after each of our esteemed presenters, we're going to take a moment to answer some questions that are directly raised for us in the Q&A panel, which you'll find on the right-hand side of your screen. So please use the chat and the Q&A extensively to join in and to comment in either official language, and we'll do our best to respond to comments and questions in English and in French. I'll just comment, if I could, really quickly on the objectives of the workshop. And as I mentioned, it will be delivered in English, and we encourage your participation in both languages. What we're really hoping to do today is to be able to strengthen partnerships and networks. And we're hoping that all of you in the chat will tell us where you're from, what offers you might wish to make of assistance to other people on the line today, and what advice or help you're seeking from your colleagues who are with us today. But in order to be able to give those offers and asks, we really do need to create a climate of trust. Increasingly, we're referring to brave spaces in addition to safe spaces, and that means a space where we can acknowledge our limitations, especially from the IRCC front. We are a little bit newer than some of you in this space to the work on anti-racism, so we all need to be able to acknowledge where we have limitations without any fear of judgment or recrimination, and that goes equally for us. And we want to be able to maintain this network that we're hopefully going to start to build. So please give us your contact information if you're comfortable doing so in the chat. And I will also mention anyone who is not comfortable with the fact that the session is being recorded and does not wish to include their contact information. That is, of course, a possibility as well. But we hope to see many of you engaging. So why we are here today and what this is all about, and we're going to set the context a little bit in a governmental perspective. And Jess, David, and myself are all from Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, which I'll refer to as IRCC heretofore. We're going to try to eradicate all other acronyms, however, from our vocabulary because we love government speak. So I won't speak about CTO and a CTA. I'll instead say that the clerk of the Privy Council, who is the most senior public servant in the country, from whom all public servants take our marching orders, issued a call to action on anti-racism, equity, and inclusion in the federal public service. And you see links there in both official languages in the presentation. This is no small thing that our clerk is seized with and has encouraged and quite frankly required all of us to be seized with what we can be doing both in relation to employees of the federal public service and to the clients who we serve externally, to be stamping out racism and other forms of oppression. And we also have within our department, deputy and associate deputies minister who have established for the department an anti-racism task force. And there in the links, you see reference to the value statement on anti-racism that we have issued for IRCC that appears on our website. And the value statement at the end of this presentation is written out in full. I'll make reference to a few elements of it in a couple of slides. Also, every assistant deputy minister within the department, including our own of settlement and integration, has been required to establish commitments on anti-racism. They are accountable to our deputy minister for meeting those commitments. And we're going to talk a little bit about those commitments today and how we hope to achieve them. And a key piece of how we hope to achieve those commitments is in partnership with local immigration partnerships. So including the Red Deer LIP, which Ezgi is here representing, service provider organizations, academics, civil society writ large. We need all of you, quite frankly, in order to meet those commitments. So while we get to the next slide, what I would also mention is that within our value statement, there are a number of acknowledgements that are made. There we go. And so I am only giving you a few highlights, but one of them, which I certainly as a public servant who's been hanging around for quite some time, find remarkable for government, is that we acknowledge that racism against Indigenous peoples, Black people, and racialized groups has persisted over time. It exists to support, reinforce, and build upon supremacy of one group over others in our society, and that the elevation of white people or the settler group above others is a key factor in Canadian life. And the inertia continues to be upheld by access, privilege, indifference. A pretty profound statement for a government department to be making, and it's only, of course, as profound as what we resolve to do and concretely do with respect to that acknowledgement and others. So we resolve to be accountable and transparent through collection, use, and dissemination of disaggregated data, and through reporting on our programs and our progress and outcomes in relation to our programs and policies in order to identify and address systemic barriers which exist. Again, fairly significant resolution that really holds our feet to the fire with respect to our accountabilities. So I'm going to just pause there. I'm going to turn, if I could, to Jesslyn Thibodeau, who's going to dig in a little bit more deeply on what this acknowledgement and these statements mean with respect specifically to settlement and integration and an anti-racism lens within IRCC. Jess, over to you.
Thank you, and hi everybody. So like Tracy said, the next couple of slides that I'll deal with are about how the settlement and integration sector, which again is government speak, and the name of our sector within IRCC that contains both settlement operations and settlement policy, how we are kind of actioning the acknowledgement and the call to action within our sector. So our first major step is that the sector has a new ADM advisor, whose name is Tracy Donaldson, with an explicit anti-racism tasking. So we have somebody who's kind of Everybody within policy and operations is kind of taking it on themselves, but then we also have someone who has that kind of 10,000-foot view and looking at things writ large. And then the second is furthering that acknowledgement that Tracy was talking about and understanding the unique role that the settlement and resettlement programs can play in the lives of newcomers, and then the responsibilities that are associated with that program. The sector will be undertaking work to understand how the settlement program can apply an anti-racism lens to all of its work on both the policy and the operational sides. So with the first milestone of the next CFP, which is currently slated for 2024, kind of in mind, we have organized our activities or our planned activities into 3 phases. So the first is to take stock of our current evidence, current data, and to understand the gaps that exist. So this is a really large exercise that takes into account things that IRCC knows, and also things that lots of other organizations like ESGI's are doing, and really getting a lay of the landscape to understand where there are knowledge gaps. The second phase flowing from that is to engage with clients, engage with organizations, engage with LIPs and RIFs and others to fill those knowledge gaps. So here is where you may be hearing from us, you know, in the future around some research that we're hoping to do. And the third, flowing out from all of those findings, will be to develop recommendations and specific policy guidance in preparation for the call for proposals in 2024. Furthermore, what we're doing is exploring the settlement program's impacts from the point of view of various actors, so newcomers and clients, and then another kind of population being the organizations that we fund, LIPs and RIFs, and also SPOs. The third and fourth are IRCC settlement program policy and our operational sector, as well as we can't ignore the larger societal context in which all of our settlement program takes place. So for example, taking into account reconciliation. So one example that I'm going to talk about today is a little bit about the disaggregated data that IRCC is newly collecting and what we can do with it. So you may or may not know that one of the main sources to be explored is the Newcomer Outcome Survey. So this is IRCC's primary source of settlement and resettlement outcomes data. It gets sent to both clients and non-clients of IRCC funded services. So we get a lot of information about our clients, but we also get a lot of information about newcomers who do not access our services. They may be accessing, you know, provincial or territorial services, but not IRCC. So this provides us a very good comparison group from which we can explore differences. It's approximately sent to 800,000 newcomers each year, and it targets all individuals who became a permanent resident in certain years and who are over the age of 18 or over at the time of the survey. I will say we are hoping to launch the next version of the survey next week. So you'll be seeing some notices about that that's coming out. So what the Newcomer Outcomes Survey does, this is its 4th year of it running. So it has been running since 2018. It collects information to help us report on settlement program outcomes as defined by IRCC. So understanding there are lots of other outcomes, there are lots of other ways in which organizations and the settlement program or resettlement program impact people's lives. The survey is there to help us report on the settlement program investment, if you will. So it collects information on resettlement experience, if required, knowledge of life in Canada, official knowledge of official languages and use of official languages, employment knowledge and status, including reasons for not working, which is really, really important to provide context to things like caregiving for either children or other family members. And also some of the larger kind of Statistics Canada census type questions around volunteering, group membership, and sense of belonging. So it's a really wide swath of information, and it's a very useful source of information for IRCC. Last year in 2020, for the first time, the survey collected information on the race of the respondent. So it was an individual question. It was a multiple response question that asked the race or ethnicity of the respondent. There was a prefer not to say option, and there was an other specify option. And like I already said, it was also a multiple response option. The question was based off of StatsCan with a few modifications that we made for the IRCC context. So when analyzed even by itself, the first time that IRCC has this information, there's a lot of value in understanding our clients and our non-clients, but the real power comes in combination with other demographic characteristics like gender or age, and that's where the data being combined in different ways really opens up a really new and important avenue of analysis. So all of this that I'm talking about will be part of that phase 1 that I talked about. We have this information, let's mine it, let's explore it, let's see what we see, and then let's also kind of highlight some questions for maybe future research or future exploration that we can explore in phase 2. And going back to that phase 1, there are lots of other pre-existing research that I'm sure a lot of people on this call have done or are undertaking, and we want to hear about all of it, dare I say. So please let us know about what your work is, either in the chat, in the Q&As, or there's some contact information for all 4 of us at the end of the presentation. So we do really want to hear about what's going on. We want to make sure we're not duplicating work, we're leveraging the hard work that everybody is doing, and that really whatever we do in phase 2 to fill in some of those knowledge gaps is work that needs to be done. So the last little piece I'll talk about that is really important when we're undertaking this work, especially within the context of settlement program or resettlement program measurement, is that context matters. So we are internally increasing our capacity to conduct various types of research that we've never really been able to do before, to help us understand not only the outcomes of settlement programs clients, but going further down which services are key and for which populations, and also at which point along someone's settlement journey. So the timing of those services and what makes most sense, what has the most impact. Essential to our work is understanding that the starting line or the start line is different for each newcomer. And it's imperative that we understand the factors, internal or external, that might influence that starting line. So using our evidence to try to, like I've said before, see what we can see and see what we can figure out using conventional research methods and our data, and then going a little bit further to dive deeper in, maybe using qualitative data or collecting additional quantitative data to understand and to make sure that we're really getting a sense of an individual person's starting line and what might influence that. We also need to calibrate our definition of quote unquote success for newcomers to make sure that we're having appropriate expectation or appropriate outcomes and targets are being applied to the program, and they're not being applied kind of writ large across the whole program, and to have more nuance in what we define as success, again, taking into account that starting line. Our accountability from an IRCC perspective does require that the settlement program reports annually, including outcomes and targets, to demonstrate the impact of settlement program investments. So kind of living within that reality, what we're trying to do is learn about the starting lines, calibrating our success, and having potentially different targets for different populations. The last little piece I'll just throw in as a bit of a plug where you can see some of this preliminary work that we're doing. This highlights report was released publicly. The links are there, so if you download the decks, you will be able to click on those links to see the reports in English or French. This is basically a full overview of what we currently know. It highlights, some of the gaps in knowledge, like I talked about. It also highlights kind of some of our future research work or some of the areas in which we find important for research. And I will say that this report was done before we got the newest round of data that includes the race data. So that's not included in this report, but you'll see lots of breakdowns by gender and by age and immigration category. And we do pull in many other sources that do talk about race and gender and some of those other pieces as well. So it's intended to be kind of a big kind of overview of all of the findings that we have thus far.
Thanks, Jess. And I am going to go to some Q's and A's. So one Q&A, which has got a few likes in the Q&A box from Mohammed, who comes from my hometown of Hamilton, asking a question: how can we find the outcome survey results? And could this survey data be disaggregated by census division level? So over to you, Jess.
Sure, that's a really great question that we get a lot. So we are currently working to get the first couple of years of Newcomer survey data into the research data centers. So Statistics Canada has research data centers that will now allow anyone who has access to those to go in and see the actual microdata linked up with other pieces. So that's kind of one avenue to access the data. The other piece is that we are also working to, we do have national and provincial territorial level results from previous years, and we are working to have kind of a central repository because, like I mentioned, the settlement program research capacity is a little bit new. We are working to have kind of a central place on our external website where we can kind of drop all of those pieces of information, because we do send them out, you know, through conferences and through meetings that we're at, but it's really difficult when you don't have a central repository. So we are working on that to be able to put up the national level and the provincial territorial level results. You have a very good question about the census division level. In 2020, in the race question, the other new question we asked is what community they were living in. So in the past, we had asked which province and territory they were currently, you know, answering the, and starting in 2020 and again next week, we will be asking, there's a secondary question that lists all of the cities in Alberta, for example, that, and then they tell us where they're answering that question from. So that is a very low level of analysis. I always say I kind of live in the middle of nowhere and my small little hamlet is on the list. So it's very small, and it really enables us to kind of dive in and cut the data in very different ways, looking at, you know, rural across the country or northern across the country, as well as obviously pulling out differences that might exist between Calgary and Edmonton. So we're out to dive into last year's data in addition to the race question, and to see what we can see around the communities. And so I know I don't have a definitive answer on how you can access the survey results, but please know that we are working on getting that information out as much as we can in a centralized way.
Thanks, Jess. I'm just doing a quick scan in the chat to see if I can locate other questions specific to you before we go to our next presenter. I do see a question about whether there have been studies done on the use, oops, it just flipped, of IRCC services by those transitioning from permanent to permanent resident from other statuses, presumably from temporary to permanent. And like SP, PGWP. So Jess, I don't know if you want to comment on that at all, or if you need a second to contemplate.
I can talk about it quickly. It is definitely a growing area of interest, looking at those additional folks, not necessarily from, you know, external, but who are already residing in Canada. We do, this is also a new piece of data that we've requested to be linked with our Newcomer outcome survey. So that will provide a really rich additional kind of context around understanding how long someone may have been in the country prior to becoming PR, so that we're not treating all people who have became PR in 2018 as equal. Where there's more, you know, there's a bit depth in their story that we need to dive into, again, to understand the full context and that starting line of newcomers. And I think we need to be really careful as well about the assumptions we make about people who have been here previously. They may be more advanced than others in certain ways, but I think we need to be really careful to understand where there may still be settlement needs once somebody becomes PR. So it is definitely an area of interest that we're seeing, and I can't wait to get the new linkage of data that I'm waiting for right now and dive into the data and see what it says.
Thanks a million, Jess. And I see a question also about where can the highlights report be viewed, and I think you've given links in both languages to the highlights report right in this presentation deck. I should
Yeah.
also mention that the deck in its entirety will be made available in both official languages, and we believe the organizers will be able to post the deck en anglais et en français.
What I can do as well, I'm sharing my screen so I can't grab it, but I will grab the links from this slide and put them right into the chat as well. So you could click right on that in English and French. I'll just have to wait until we're done here.
Thanks, Jess. And I'm seeing another question. Given the realities of our rapidly warming climate and its outsized impact on poorer countries, is there any advocacy being done by IRCC to encourage the Government of Canada to recognize climate change as a cause for human migration and to shift government policy accordingly? And I'll start to respond to that question, and I'm going to invite David Hickey to join in, and it's actually possibly a good segue because David is up as our next presenter, which is to say we actually, the executive cadre at IRCC, just the other day had a session with an esteemed panel of various academics from various stripes, speaking with us about that exact issue of joined up policy development, climate impacts, housing, poverty, and other aspects of program and policy development, and what the impact is with respect to migration, with respect to who is coming from which parts of the world, and how do we settle and integrate those individuals. So I think it's fair to say that increasingly the Immigration Department is going to be talking with departments across the swath, because we recognize that climate, housing, just about everything that happens in a social policy context has an impact on and is impacted by immigration. So I feel as though we're starting to get a little bit better with respect to that. David, before I go to you, I'm just going to jump back a little bit because I may have missed part of the question to Jess that also talked about country of origin in addition to race. And Jess, I don't know if you want to say anything with respect to data on people's country of origin. Thanks.
Sure, that's a good point. In our administrative data, we have various country of origin variables. So, and all of them provide slightly different viewpoints. So we have country of birth, we have country of citizenship, and then we also have country of last permanent resident. So all of that tells kind of a slightly different story about where somebody was born versus maybe, you know, where they have citizenship versus where they resided most recently before coming to Canada. So we tend to kind of look at all three of those variables in coordination with other variables. So we do have all of those pieces. And then again, once we have the race information, or since we have the race information, it adds a whole other level to that discussion, and, you know, different subpopulations that we might want to take a look at. So it's a really good point.
Thanks so much, Jesslyn. And so we're going to follow the same format. David will give a brief presentation, and I will be scanning the chat and, more importantly, the Q&A for questions from all of you. And I do want to thank those who have already in the chat included comments and their contact information. Critically important so that we can stay in touch. David, over to you.
Thanks, Tracy. And I will try and pick up where Jess left off to some degree, because I'm keenly interested in how we use data to inform some of our anti-racism work in the department. And I'm involved in both the internal work that the department is doing, but also the external work, which is an area I think I'm a little bit more focused on. And I think our mandate in the department really makes us a little bit unique in that front, because you know, all departments are involved on the internal side, and they're all involved in looking at their policies and programs. But if you look at our mission statement, it involves obviously both responsibilities on settlement, but also a goal to reach out to all Canadians and foster increased intercultural understanding and an integrated society. And so I think in that sort of broad scope of what our mission statement does, you know, racism is clearly factoring into the conversation more and more. And I come at this from 15 years in communications in the department, and in that space, I was always very interested in how we use polling to sort of inform some of what we do. And so as I started to get involved in the external work we're doing on anti-racism, it struck me that we had never asked newcomers about their lived experience with racism. And so that's an area that I'm looking to get involved in. And I know many of our partners are a bit ahead of us on that front, but I think there's a gap that we need to fill there, and we have something to bring to the table. And we know that in sort of trying to fulfill our mission, we can't do this without settlement partners. They're key to that, and in many aspects, they're ahead of us. So in looking at what we want to do, again, we haven't asked our clients about their lived experience with racism. So the idea is to propose a national survey using the same email database that Jessalyn was talking about in our national outcome survey. And so as she mentioned, that goes out every year to 800,000 newcomers. And I'm not proposing that we would use quite that broad a database, but still have a large enough sample size that we can make this relevant at the community level. And we'll inform that with the work partners have done, which is, I think, a polite way of saying that we will we'll steal questions from others who have done similar work so that we have a basis of comparison where that makes sense. But we'll have the advantage of sort of specifically targeting newcomers as a result of having their emails. And so we're looking forward to doing that and to sharing results and to seeing how it can be useful, not only for our internal work, but for the work all of you are doing out at the community levels as well. So I just wanted on this slide to acknowledge that, you know, as I've mentioned, many of our partners are ahead of us. You'll see just a couple examples here. The Victoria LIP, which did a really interesting study, but then as interestingly, I think, used the results to pull together some community conversations. Brandon, which used more of a town hall approach to try and pull people together, but published a report on community voices. Our friends in New Brunswick who have surveyed people in addition to much of the really good engagement work they do. There's a report highlighted, the green one here. It comes out of Southern Ontario, and I think there's a session in workshops tomorrow where we'll get more in depth into some of the work done there, because there's 9 communities that have done survey work there in collaboration with Western University on some really well-researched reports that have some interesting conclusions on them. So I'll recommend that workshop to you. Et aussi, c'est la Semaine nationale de l'immigration francophone. So there's a report highlighted here that la Fédération des communautés francophones et acadiennes a produit to talk about inclusion and diversity. So lots of examples of where our partners are sort of already active in this space. In addition to some of what our partners in the settlement world are doing, though, I really want to look at what others are doing. And so, for example, Keith Newman was just speaking at the last session, highlighting some of the work that Environics has done, not just in the area of support for immigration, but more specifically on racism. And so we'll pull in some of that work as well. And we're looking to work with Keith on a new survey, which I'm quite excited about, which is going to look at the idea of social norms. So generally what we do in polling is we poll people's attitudes. And then when we're designing campaigns to sort of affect change, we sort of follow from that and seek ways to sort of change attitudes. And what we're proposing in this survey that Keith is proposing is to look at the idea of social norms. What are people's behaviors? And the idea is that maybe it's easier and more effective to change behaviors as opposed to just trying to change attitudes. So what is now socially acceptable in society in terms of anti-racism and racist behavior, and how do we move the yardsticks so that we can try and, you know, inform people on what's acceptable in terms of what they say and do. So I think a really interesting area there as well. So just some of the key questions. Clearly, we want to know, you know, whether they've experienced racism, when, where, from whom, how often. Did they report it, and did they know where to report it, which I think is an interesting question. What was the impact if they did experience racism, and how did they go about coping with that experience? Is something that may be a little bit unique to us. I'm interested in sort of learning from newcomers whether their experience with racism in this country was different than what they expected before arriving. And then I think, as I mentioned, we're keen to sort of, as much as possible, use questions that others have used so that we have an element of comparability. While we have some advantages in sort of being able to target specifically newcomers, others have had broader cross sections of racism within their communities. And so I'm interested, for example, in the question of whether newcomers are experiencing racism in a different way or more frequently than other racialized people in the community. So I think that'll be interesting. So what do we do with the results? Well, I think there's a few things we can do. I mentioned that Victoria and others have used results of some of the survey work they've done to encourage community conversations. So I think it's a good lever to do that, bringing partners together to talk about what this means and what we can do about it. I think it can certainly do a lot to help us in sort of the design and targeting of awareness campaigns. So I'll talk a bit about more of that in a second. I think we can use it to identify gaps and inform future programming. So for example, in some of the surveys I've seen where they ask those questions of, did you report it and did you know where to report it? That there is a lot of uncertainty about how and where people should reporting these incidents if they don't feel they want to raise it with the police, for example. So I think those are questions we probably need to grapple with and see whether those solutions are, most likely at the community level, but maybe there's roles federally as well. I think we can use it as a baseline to observe trends, which is important. And again, per Tracy's request at the beginning, really interested in what other people's ideas are as we do collect this data and what we should include. And I'm looking to sort of see where there's opportunities for ongoing collaboration on this. And I'm really sort of excited to see where collaboration has sort of picked up in the last year or two in some of these areas, particularly as the local immigration partnerships, I think, have played an important role in bringing some of that together and sharing best practices. But I think there's more that we could do, and I think there's a role for the federal government to sort of participate in some of those conversations. So, for example, what I've witnessed over the past couple of years is I've watched this space carefully, and I had a pretty instrumental role in launching our own Immigration Matters campaign, which, by the way, was entirely founded based on what we saw out of polling to sort of design that campaign. But I think, what I've seen is a lot of creativity out there in communities in terms of how they launch campaigns to either raise awareness and support for immigration writ large, or more specifically in this space of anti-racism. And Ezgi will have some examples of that from Red Deer in a minute. But I can't help but think that, in this next phase, as we're all getting a little more involved in this space, what we can accomplish through a little bit more collaboration and with a little bit more targeting. So, for example, some of the surveys that have come out have sort of found, and this probably won't surprise any of us, in terms of incidents of racism, where people are experiencing it. In places of employment is one of the top 2 or 3 places. And who are the perpetrators? Middle-aged white guys is sort of an obvious target. And so I think back in things like, our Immigration Matters campaign that I had a hand in. And it's always been sort of a struggle to sort of figure out how to target these campaigns. And I think we've been relatively creative in how we do that. But we haven't sort of had the data to drive a very specific idea like, okay, what would a campaign look like if we were targeting places of employment and going after specific subsets where we know there are issues like middle-aged white people. So I think if we sort of put our thinking caps on and collaborated around that and thought what would sort of a more unified campaign potentially look like, and how could we share creative and or how could we try 4 or 5 different things to see what works. And I think the advantage in some of this space is when you think about a challenge like that, every major corporation in the country at this point in time is running some sort of diversity and inclusion campaign. And so I think there's a willing audience there, to a willing sort of group of partners that we can tap into to think through how we can collaborate. So I just think data is our entry point to sort of think through how we target and collaborate in sort of a different way than we have done in the past. And I'm excited to think through what our opportunity might be to build on some of the great work that's already being done in the sector, and to bring sort of the data sets and the opportunities we have at the federal level into that conversation. So I think that's it for me.
Thank you so much, David. And before we go to Ezgi, I'm going to actually group and cluster a little bit of the excellent questioning and some of the chat comments. Thanks to folks, Keith Newman noting that there is some data that he has on racialized newcomers broadly. We've had a couple of people say that they've had some interesting experiences around reporting incidents of racism. In the questions are some questioning around understanding of racism, the fact that questions around racism can be triggering. So what kinds of protections might be built in? And I think it's also a little bit of an offer of folks, if I can extrapolate a bit, to say, you know, there are some people who might be interested in helping to frame those questions to make sure that we can limit the extent to which they're triggering or re-traumatizing, and that we're protecting anonymity where we need to. So David, I wonder if you wanted to comment a little bit on that.
Yeah, I'm sort of very much aware of that, and we want to be very conscious of that in terms of how we phrase questions, but more importantly, sort of the lead-in as we send this out. And there too, I think we can learn from what our partners have done, because they've grappled with this as well. But in discussing this with others, so for example, the National LIP Secretariat, which offered to sort of put us in touch with some of the advisory groups working with LIPs in their own councils to sort of look at our questions and look at exactly that type of language and sort of highlight where there may be issues of concern in how we're phrasing questions and sort of how we're approaching the whole subject, to make sure we're doing that very cautiously.
Thanks so much, David. So just reiterating, partnership is certainly welcome. David, before we turn to Ezgi, I'm going to ask a question. You may have mentioned, when are you hoping to launch the survey?
I am hoping that we can get this out in January.
Thanks so much. All right, so we're now going to turn to Ezgi from the Red Deer Lip. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. I would firstly like to talk a little bit about Red Deer so that you have an idea where it is and what the demographic is like. It's situated in Alberta, central Alberta, and with a population of 100,000. The immigrant population in the 2016 census was around 15%. And we have a lot of immigrants from Philippines, and Ukraine comes next, and then India, Syria, and Nigeria. When we look at the languages, you see from 2011 to 2016, there are some shifts, but the first top two languages stayed the same as being Tagalog, Spanish, and then comes Arabic, Ukrainian, and Cantonese. But that is not it. We have 112 non-official languages spoken in Red Deer as well. So we are quite diverse for Central Alberta, and the percentage, as you can see, with the comparison 2011-2016 is increasing rapidly as well. So to talk about a little bit about what Red Deer Local Immigration Partnership is and what we do, we were initiated in 2015 by the 5 founding community partners, and we foster a systematic approach to engage several different institutions and organizations, including but not limited to service provider organizations, employers, school boards, health centers, boards of trade, all 3 levels of the government, ethnocultural and faith-based organizations, and the larger community in general. And we do that in order to do 3 main things: to support community-based partnerships and local strategic planning to produce a more welcoming and inclusive community for newcomers and for all. Secondly, we support local knowledge sharing through research and needs assessments and also asset mapping. And finally, we strive to improve coordination of effective services that facilitate newcomer settlement and integration in collaboration with our partners. And that brings me to the next slide. We have a central planning council, and in that council we have high-level representatives from different institutions and organizations in our city, and also, as I said, 3 levels of the government, federal, municipal, and provincial, so that we can have a broad look, multi-sectoral look on what the newcomers' issues are and find solutions together, make decisions, and then implement them together as well. So we create partnerships together. And we also have an Immigrant Advisory Council. We try to have a diversity of newcomers representing different countries there. They have the first-hand experiences of being a newcomer in Red Deer. So they are kind of our eyes in the community. They tell us what we might be missing, as maybe some conversations are going on in ethnocultural communities that we are not aware of through our research. They keep us on the track. They give us advice. And also, the co-chairs of the Immigrant Advisory Council are also the members of Central Planning Council, so that there isn't a strict division between decision-making and the people we are making the decisions for. So now I'd like to give a little bit of context and why we needed to do a research on racism. There have been some increasing incidents of racism in our city. I will not get into the details of all, but I think it is important to kind of picture what the last years have been like for some. In 2017, there was a school fight that broke between Canadian and Syrian students, and that was followed with, unfortunately, anti-Syrian sentiments and protests. In 2018, there was a large anti-immigration gathering that created some discomfort for immigrants. And in 2019, the white supremacist groups were actually quite active. Unfortunately, we found soldiers of wooden stickers on the immigrant center's door, and we had our windows broken a few times. And also every weekend in 2018 and 19, there were white supremacist protests that were very close, just 1 block away to the immigrant center, that made the environment quite unwelcoming for newcomers to access those services as well. And finally, when we reached 2020, it was kind of the boiling, or maybe the explosion point. There was a white supremacist attack against Black Lives Matter protesters. And that was the point we decided that what we have been doing is not enough. We need to do more. And we are hopefully doing that. In 2020 and 2021, as there have been in many different cities in North America, there were increasing anti-Asian sentiments in both traditional and online media. So we have been doing different things up until this point to combat the racism. We organized community conversations together with the Welcoming and Inclusive Communities Network. We co-organized annual events such as Community Power of One and Refugee Day. And we had presentations in the community around the Immigration Matters campaign, and also busting myths about immigration and refugees. And also some of our partners have anti-racism response training for different community organizations and for people, different individuals as well, and public awareness teams at schools. So we needed to do this research because there were increasing incidents of racism, but there was no racism-specific data collected in Red Deer so far. So we asked IRCC for funds to conduct a research, and then taking the results, develop an anti-racism campaign after that. We received the funds, generous funds from IRCC. However, we did something, we were quite lucky, I think, to run into really good collaborators and partners. And we, in conversation with Intercultural Association of Greater Victoria and Greater Victoria Local Immigration Partnership, we took their survey and adapted them into our own context, changed the questions a little bit, but used their framework. So that allowed us to have a strong survey. We also worked with a team of volunteer academics who helped us kind of tweak the questions a little bit, implement it, disseminate it, and they have been also tremendous help with analyzing the data. So with just through collaboration, we were able to use $0 on the research itself and utilize all of that for our anti-racism campaign. We used open sampling method, which means we did not directly target any specific audience, but wanted to get a general overview of racism around in Red Deer, around racism. So for Red Deer, 665 respondents was quite a large number. And it was only done in 2 weeks. And when we come to the structure of the survey, there were 4 parts of it. We wanted to, of course, know the demographics. That was quite important for us to know who is saying what and who's experiencing what. And next, we wanted to know how people, if people witness racism, to what extent, and what do they think on racism in Red Deer. And then we looked at the experiences of racism in Red Deer, specifically the impacts of that. And finally, we looked at how people respond to witnessing or experiencing racism in Red Deer. To give you an idea of what the demographics are like in Red Deer in comparison to the survey respondents, as you can see, they were quite comparable. So the sample we had was quite, I guess, representative of the city's population. When we come to the details, I will just highlight some of the results. The research report is going to come in January. We're looking forward to that, but we already have quite a bit of interesting results. For example, 50% of respondents say that racism in Red Deer is worse than other places, while only 15% say that it is better. And when we come to the pandemic era, it's 46% say that it got even worse since the pandemic started, while only 4.6% say that it got better. When we look at the experiences of racism, how people experience it, the total sample, only 29.9% of the respondents experienced racism in the past 5 years, while 16.1% experienced it from the local police. However, when you look at the chart here, you'll see that when you look at the specific demographics, visible minorities actually experienced, 80% of visible minorities experienced it. And when you look at Indigenous, almost 70% experienced it. And when you look at other category, which was mostly from their qualitative results, we got that they were mostly biracial, the level goes up to 60%. So it seems that the issue is quite significant. And when we look at the groups that experienced it most frequently, Indigenous groups came first, and then next immigrants, Muslim, Black, Asian, and as opposed to locations where they experienced it most often, online, as you might guess, was the most prevalent place, and more examples of overt racism as well. And unfortunately, as David mentioned, workplaces were the second, and grocery stores were the third. While there were some types of racism that were experienced most frequently, being stereotyping, inappropriate jokes, and racial slurs and comments, some other types of racism had most negative impact. Those are unfair grading in school, inaccurate treatment at health clinics, and missed housing opportunities. So you can see that impacts of those life affecting types of racism would be more significant. So when we look at the responses to racism, we asked people who experienced racism if they are likely to seek help, and 76.2% said that they are not, while only 23.7% said that they are likely to seek help. When we ask the reasons why, we see that quite a bit of high number, almost half of the respondents don't know where to go for help, while only 31% do. And it is actually one of the gaps that we identified. Is there actually a place where people can go to report incidents of racism and get support while doing that? That is actually a gap that is we're hoping and working with our partners to fill at the moment. And top 3 reasons people don't seek help: they feel uncomfortable, worried for safety, and they're afraid to hurt their job security. When we look at the intervention side of responding to racism, 76.6% said they rarely or never does anyone intervene to help them, while a very small amount, 3.7%, said that people often help. And the reasons why are, I think, quite comparable to the reasons why people don't seek help. Is because they're worried for their safety, they don't know what to say, they're uncomfortable, and they're afraid that it will hurt their job security. So we wanted to know what would help people speak out more when they experience racism so that we can fill that gap. And they said feeling supported by others was the most important. Learning how to take action and then feeling confident, knowing about human rights protections in Alberta came next. And similarly, I think they are also comparable when we ask what would help to reduce racism in Red Deer, like number one for that, and what helps people speak out more are quite similar in my opinion. More people intervening in racist situations, supporting each other would help reduce it. And then came better cultural training and protocols for police, supportive practices and policies in workplaces, more anti-racism training, talking to friends and family about racism, and more diversity in leadership positions. So looking at those highlights, what are some of the key takeaways for us? What did we identify with this research? To begin with, we decided that a social marketing campaign is needed in our town to combat racism at its most active place, which was online. But we don't want to be just limited to online spaces because there are quite a bit of people who may not have access to online, but listen to radio stations or read local newspapers. So we will have Proud to Be Your Neighbor campaign. And we wanted to have some kind of like balance, I would say, in our campaign, the first phase of the campaign, around bringing different realities of Red Deer closer. And what do we mean by that? When we look at the responses, we saw that there are like 5 different realities, different perspectives that exist around racism in our city, ranging from it doesn't even exist to begin with, or you're creating it by talking about it, to I'm self-harming because of the severity of the racism that I'm experiencing. So we wanted to bring out human stories with Proud to Be Your Neighbor. We took pairs of diverse friends. They talk about their friendship, they talk about their relationship, how they contribute to the community, as well as their issues with racism, how they experience racism. We find that putting a face to an experience helps empathize more. So we try to strive to create that understanding as well as awareness to begin with. And then there are some other things we identified and we want to do more on by building subcommittees. For example, more training on Alberta human rights as well as practical anti-racism response training. More training, policies and practices to combat racism in the workplace. And also engagement with the local police is key to improve policies and practices. And we also identified 2 big gaps. One was in reporting racist incidents, and one of our partners, Ubuntu, is actually currently working on that together with RCMP, hopefully to have a reporting clinic that will have support for people as well. So that brings me to the next gap in support and resources for victims of racist incidents. We don't just want to know that something happened to them, but also how we can support people when they come to us for reporting incidents. And finally, we need more immigrant-specific data as well as more in-depth qualitative research to delve deeper into the experiences of racism in our town. So I will close this up with kind of an example of what Tracy mentioned before, and we hope that he will do similarly. I think Tracy might give more information on it later as well. We want to give you what we can offer around this, and we also want to tell you what we need so that maybe you have something among those that you can help us with, and we can help you with what we can offer. We have now the experience of racism research, so we can support you with the questions or the methods or anything related to that, the way Greater Victoria supported us. We can help with social marketing ideas and share our outcomes with you. We can share resources on busting myths about immigration, intersectionality, diversity and inclusion in the workplace, and specifically give you some resources around Workplace Inclusion Charter, which is a program that was designed to improve underrepresented populations' well-being in the workplace, together with community and businesses and employers. So a few things we need. If you have any good practices on this, please feel free to reach out to us. We would appreciate that. So best practices on reporting racist incidents, and support systems for victims of racism as well as how to engage the local police. And finally, perhaps a more specific ask of the IRCC, and they seem quite eager to give us that, is immigrant-specific data and qualitative research, again, to understand more of the experiences of both newcomers as well as more specific individual experiences qualitatively. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ezgi. Lots of good questions coming up both in the Q&A and in the chat. And I'm going to direct this one to you, Ezgi. I'm not really sure where to direct it, though. And it comes with the fact that there are different ways of expressing the mental health impacts of racism on an individual. And that in and of itself can be challenging in terms of how we go about collecting data. And so I wonder if that's something that your LIP has thought about. You know, when we look at impacts, cultures often have different ways of defining elements of those impacts, including things like mental health. I'll turn that one to you.
Yeah, definitely. That was one of the considerations while we were building the survey. So we wanted for the survey to be for survey respondents to be well informed. And we had a section before they started the survey giving information about what it was like, what we were collecting, how we were collecting it, and with a trigger warning that the questions might trigger some discomfort, some perhaps bring some traumatic experiences back. And we had some contact information of different support systems that could help those people. And we told them, please end it at any time you feel uncomfortable and feel free to contact these pages. So we tried to have informed consent to begin with, and also some support as well as we could with a survey. When we have more like in-person focus groups, we are planning to have more integrated support, for example, having the support of perhaps a psychology department at our university, or having an actual psychologist present to help out if anything comes up.
Thanks, Ezgi. And this question was a bit in relation to David's comments, although it certainly pertains to yours as well, and it's somewhat related, around gender-based violence and the intersection between racism and gender-based violence and experiences of racism when accessing support services, which can create a bit of a vicious circle where in order to get support, there's an experience of racism, which compounds the experience of violence. So a little bit more with respect to gender issues. And I'm wondering if anybody has comments in relation to gender and how we can look a little bit more on intersectional analysis around gender broadly and around gender-based violence.
Do you want me to jump in, Ezgi? I'm not sure if you want to join in. I think my honest answer on this is that's an excellent point that I haven't thought through well enough, and will, you know, as part of the purpose of this forum is to seek advice like that and how we can maybe think some of that through in terms of how we maybe ask questions. I'm conscious of those kind of questions and the triggering elements that have been raised as well, but we do want to have some sense of what people's experience with racism is. And so how do we probe some of that intersectionality? Because clearly we're interested in that intersectionality of people experiencing racism and discrimination for various reasons, as well as the more extreme examples around where that actually results in violence. And I think that's an area we want to know about for sure, but we'll seek some advice on how to tread carefully in that delicate space.
Thanks, David. Lots of comments, lots of questions. Can the LIPs use your survey for data collection? Can we share questions, examples of LIPs who are doing work saying, you know, let's leverage, and exactly that is the point that we're trying to drive home. today is, so we will certainly be taking away everything that is here and looking at what can be done in terms of the connections we're making. There's a question here around the municipal nominee program and whether we have an update on that. I personally don't have an update, although I do know that that we can certainly be in touch with our colleagues who are in charge of that area with respect to what they're doing and how that might help to leverage some of the conversation that we're having right now. I would invite presenters. I'm trying to kind of identify some of the key things that are jumping out at me. Is there anything that you wish to be able to do a shout out to folks on? I also see a comment around partnership with post-secondary institutions. Again, partnerships wherever we can be leveraging, I would say absolutely. So does anybody see anything in either the questions or the chat that they want to sink their teeth into?
I can go ahead. There's a question I've been looking at from JVS Toronto about how some newcomers may not understand, what they're experiencing as racism, and not, the example here is difference between lack of skills and racism when turned down for a job opportunity. And I think that's really important for us to remember, and speaks a little bit to our plan of kind of trying to conduct research in a 360 format. So talking to clients, but then also talking to organizations and LIPs who might have kind of a different view and experience for themselves, but then also a different perspective on what newcomers might be facing, to kind of try to dig down a little bit deeper into understanding, skills versus racism in terms of being turned down for a job opportunity. So I think that it is really good to remember that, and I think it is something that we try to keep in mind when we're thinking about our research plan, and that's why we're not just going to clients, but attempting to go to organizations and LIPs and to other community partners as well.
Thanks, Jess. Super helpful. So I am going to actually ask you, Jess, if you wouldn't mind to turn to the broader questions that appear toward the end of the deck. And we've had a lot of folks comment on this, the kinds of challenges in their communities, what they are asking for. And we've certainly seen a lot of people saying, they would love to have the questions that we are posing. They would love to be able to offer questions and work that they have already done. There's a question here I don't think we've touched on. We've been focusing very much at the community level. Is there more that we could be doing perhaps at more of a national level? Of course, the LIPs will know that you have a national LIP secretariat. What more could we be doing if we pulled together across the country with respect to different elements of anti-racism work at a national level? This issue of reporting, and I saw some commentary in the chat about it's great to have reporting, but there is frustration on the part of those who do the reporting when it seems that nothing really happens with that. So thoughts with respect to reporting. And last but not least, how do we get in touch? If you have not yet already identified your contact information, which many of you have, please do take a second to make sure that we know how to reach you, because we'll be mining everything that is in the chat and in the Q's and A's in order to reach out to each of you. So I don't know if anybody wishes to add anything in the chat with respect to reporting, with respect to national level action, with respect to particular challenges that they are facing that we've not yet touched on, or specific questions or asks that you have of each other. And then I see a question that has come up for Ezgi while folks are continuing to populate the chat, which is whether there are data showing the impacts of your programs and the retention of immigrants in your communities.
So we have an environmental scan that looked at the settlement and integration programs that exist in our city and what are the impacts of that. And also that identified some of the perhaps strengths and then weaker points that we might be able to improve upon. So I can share the results of that environmental scan, as well as there are 2 researches done, a photo voice research project. One was done by Central Alberta Immigrant Women's Association in collaboration with Red Deer College. They looked at the immigrant women's experiences, settlement and integration experiences through photographs that was more accessible, interactive. And then we took the same kind of format to look at the experiences of immigrant men together with, it was an RD Lip and Red Deer College collaboration as well. And the results will come out very soon in January as well, together with the anti-racism research as well. And very recently, we are now submitting a new research together. It's a kind of an international collaboration if it gets accepted. We will be looking at why immigrants stay. It will be done in Australia, Canada, and also New Zealand, and it will give us a comparable kind of idea of why immigrants choose to stay, while we generally look at why they leave. So I think that will be an interesting research.
Thank you so much, Ezgi. So thanks for that offer of sharing that research. I'm going to pose a final question a little bit to all of our panelists, because lots of people have said, can we have your survey? Can we have the questions? Can we give you our questions? So David, Jess, from the Newcomer Outcome Survey, from your soon-to-be launched survey, David, any concern in terms of sharing those questions and people being able to leverage them?
No, certainly we want to get advice on the questions, which are, as mentioned, largely taken from others who have done some due diligence on this already, but we want to socialize those and get advice on them for sure. And absolutely, the whole idea behind this is to be sharing the results at a community level so that we can collectively, have the conversation on where we go from here.
And I'm more than happy to share the Newcomer Outcome Survey. If anyone has ever received it in the past, the survey is largely consistent with the exception of the race and the community questions. So any versions that you might have from 2018 or 2019 are largely still valid, but absolutely no problem with sharing those as well.
Thanks, David and Jess. And Ezgi, question for you in 30 seconds or fewer. Could you elaborate a little bit on the Proud to Be Your Neighbor campaign?
Yeah, for sure. So Proud to Be Your Neighbor campaign is not just going to be online. It will be in social media, yes, present in all online spaces. At the same time, in traditional media as well. We have an agreement with a radio station that owns several different radio stations actually in our city, as well as newspapers. And with Proud to Be Your Neighbor being the tagline, we are sharing stories of diverse pairs of people. We have, let's say, an Indigenous woman together with a Black woman, and they are sharing their friendship stories. That brings out both their how people create their relationships, how they contribute to community, as well as how they are experiencing racism. And we want to, as I said, put a face on it. These people live in our community and they are experiencing racism, and this is the level to it. And we also wanted to bring their voices as well in the radio ads too. So we are working with those pairs to bring out their stories. One other reason we wanted to do that, I mentioned it a little bit, we wanted to take a balanced approach because lately, as I mentioned, there have been some incidents in our city that created an environmental fear for people of color specifically. And we are kind of seeing a little bit of desperation as well, and we wanted to raise voice on a community level, both in social media and traditional media. Let's make some noise and bring out the positives as well as the negative experiences people are experiencing, to paint a full picture of what is going on. And then we will have different phases of that campaign as well. As I said, we are creating some subcommittees to look into the more, extreme issues ranging from building support systems to how to improve settlement and integration programming to be more anti-racist intentionally.
I'm going to just take a quick second to say thank you to our presenters. Thank you to our participants who have been extraordinarily active in the chat. We will take note of every bit of contact information that has been identified, all of the offers and asks, all of the extensions of, yep, let's collaborate, here's how you can reach me. You have our contact information. We'll be circling back to the LIP Secretariat to say, okay, this is where we've landed. How can we move forward and support one another? So it's just a huge thank you to everyone who has been involved in this session. A big shout out to our presenters. This is a beginning, by no means an end. Forthcoming survey being launched by David, forthcoming research that Eski's group is doing. Jess is going to be launching the next round of the Newcomer Outcomes Survey. We can't do everything. So we may be looking to you in addition to advice on survey questions, advice on prioritization of some of the very worthy suggestions that you have made in the chat, because we cannot boil the ocean. So we may need to prioritize and segment how we approach this work, but huge amount of gratitude to all of you for your contributions. I think our presenters can stay a little bit longer. Our producer may come in and boot us out. And those who do have to leave, we're at time now. So please feel free to depart if you need to. Eski, I'm going to turn over to you. If you wanted to jump in, you were about to hopefully launch into something that caught your interest in the chat.
Yeah, I was trying to find it around if we can use, if anybody can use the survey. I think, as I said, the collaboration, the generosity of Greater Victoria LIP helped us a lot. We had a meeting to also talk about, you know, how the survey went for them. Was there anything now looking back that they would change? They were tremendous help in giving us all the, you know, different information and different experiences they had with their survey. So we can do the same. If you would like to reach out to us in terms of, again, survey, anything that is related to survey, we would be happy to help you out. And I think another opportunity of that is I was quite interested in Greater Victoria LIP's research results. I think there are really interesting comparable points. Using the similar questions, as David said, will also give us idea about what is going on in specific towns and to what extent are they experienced differently, how frequently, vice versa. So I think it will be for the benefit of all of us if we collaborate.
Thanks so much, Eski, and that's probably a beautiful note upon which to end. Thank you so much to our presenters, and thank you so much to our participants. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.